Welcome back to Seaweed Brain, live from IA. This week we're covering chapters 12 to 14 of Madeline Miller's Circe as part of our Odyssey adaptation series as we gear up for Percy Jackson Season 2, The Sea of Monsters. We've got some very special guests. We're talking about Jason and Medea this week. Stick around. Before we get going today, content warning for this set of chapters and this episode, mention and discussion of sexual assault.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone's having a good Circe summer, a good Odyssey summer, a good version summer. Will that be out by the time this episode is out? I think so, probably.
Lorde, when does the new Lorde album come out?
I think it's June. It'll be a version summer whether it's out or not. Let's say
June
that.
27th. Yeah, this will be out by then.
Okay. Well, hope that's going well. Maybe this is a good time to have our guests introduce themselves. Guests, would you like to say something?
I'm Sam, and this time I did read, and I'm so excited to talk about Circe.
Sam is thrilled to be on an episode where their contribution is not ignorance, but knowledge instead.
The last time Sam was here was for our How Did You Like the Percy Jackson series as someone who's never read Percy Jackson before episode. Thank you, Sam, for your contributions both then and now.
I also had some input into the Patreon exclusive episode about Agatha All Along.
That's true.
Which is also something without a written or readable basis.
Yeah, that's a good plug. We need to have someone remind the listeners who are Patreon once per episode. So that was a reminder. Please find us, patreon.com/seaweedbrain.
We also have another guest here today.
Jack?
Yeah, so I'm Jack. I technically was on this podcast in its early days.
Were you on for The Sea of Monsters?
No, it was Titan's Curse.
It was Titan's Curse. Either way, we've had a lot of throwback guests recently. Huge fan favorite returns. And Jack, you were among that company.
Jack is an original. We've, I think, mentioned now many times our senior year English project that we did with our emotional support English teacher. Jack was a part of that. We talked about that on our live stream.
It's true.
Yeah.
This is also an important section for Jack to be here for, because before this podcast started, I have a very strong memory. I believe it was Thanksgiving of 2019 of being in your apartment and having you explain the different Medea tellings that you were reading in like a theory comparative literature class of some sort.
Yeah,
I'm not making this up, right?
I dipped back into the really bad essay that I wrote today. Yeah, today I really went back into like the archive section of my email,
Not really bad essay.
Jack, you're also like really like among now, I think one of the most qualified Seed Brain guests ever because you're about to get a PhD in English, right?
Yeah. That doesn't mean that I know anything about.
I'm so embarrassed. Yeah, but like we just like play pretend at like English grad student teaching on this podcast. You're like actually going to be that thing in real life.
Yeah, apparently to make it in the profession these days, you should have like a podcast or other forms of public engagement. So
wow.
So yeah.
If you're listening in the future and you're on Jack's tenure review committee, hi. Welcome.
Jack has always been very smart.
They've always slayed, and you should give them an academic job.
Before we start talking about chapters 12 through 14, I want to hear about our guest's background with Circe. When did you first read it?
I think I read it early in the pandemic, so maybe when did this book come out?
2018.
Before the pandemic, yeah.
Okay. So I think like 2020, maybe 2019. Because I was unfortunately one of those people who was a big fan of Song of Achilles back in the day when I was a young child.
It need not be unfortunate.
It's okay to be gay.
The book has many fans.
Yeah, it's okay to be gay. And then, I love women. I support women. Many of my friends are women. I have a mother. I have sisters. So I felt like reading Circe was an important part of that journey.
I didn't realize Circe came out in 2018. I kind of thought it was more recently because I know that Circe is Madeline Miller's second, which means that Song of Achilles was pre-2018. It seemed like...
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. I guess in my solipsistic existence, I thought that Song of Achilles came out like when I read Song of Achilles, which was... 2021.
No, it was in the water basically the whole time we were in undergrad.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
And I would argue that it is actually like a TikTok, book talk situation that kind of has like revived it, but it's been around.
To age myself a little bit, one of my close friends from undergrad wrote like a 100,000 word fan fiction on Song of Achilles set in San Francisco.
How does that age you?
Huh?
I don't think that ages you at all.
No, because she wrote this when she was like, young. And we are no longer that.
Jack, your background on Circe? When did you read it?
My background on Circe was that I read Song of Achilles. I don't have a background on Circe.
Wait, did you just read it for the first time?
Yeah, I just read it for the first time.
Oh my god,
Yeah.
I made you read an entire book for this podcast.
I don't think it literally occurred to any of us that you had not previously read it. Like, it didn't come up in the scheduling of this or anything.
It's stupid that I'm going to an English PhD because low-key I don't read that much. Or like I've like read like academic shit, but like novels. This is actually helping me get back into the rhythm of reading novels.
It's 2025. For those of you out there who think that getting an English PhD has to do with books, you need to grow up. You were sorely mistaken.
It has to do with podcasting.
Yeah, I will say I liked this better than Song of Achilles. Song of Achilles got really boring. It's that war, goes on forever.
We're all trying to not hit Song of Achilles too much.
Okay.
We're saying that, but at the same time, everyone has come on and apologized for preferring this book to Song of Achilles, or been like, "Oh, I'm going to say something really brave and controversial and be out on a hill by myself." No. This is a podcast where we'll all say, "You know what? Circe is better."
Okay.
And then just, keep it pushing. Song of Achilles is a lovely book. We did read it.
Oh, and I have to ask you guys one more question before we get started. Because this book is very sprawling, there's lots of themes. We're circling the ideas of femininity and womanhood and mortality. I want one word that you personally distill this book down into. What is your...
That was a lot of priming.
I know. Sorry. I said you were in charge. You asked the question, Carter.
The prime is already there. The prime is primed. One word encapsulation of Circe is what we're looking for. Jack, do you want to go first?
Yeah, humanizing.
Okay.
I was gonna say woman, but sorry.
You would not be the first person to answer that question with woman.
Yeah, I would just say woman.
Yeah. That was, I believe, the first response we got.
Yeah, woman.
And Sam has now seen Little Women. Fairly recently, but it did happen.
Yeah.
So it's not just woman, it's
Woman.
woman.
I think I put that GIF maybe twice in this outline today. So much to discuss about Little Women 2019 and chapters 12 through 14 of Madeline Miller's Circe. So this week we're returning from Crete, where we had our third boyfriend experience and realized that a golden cage is still a cage. Now we're back here in our golden cage on our island doing our thing, but increasingly restless. We're going to start with this internal dialogue that she's having with an imagined version of Pasiphae, her sister, because she is lonely. This is the, dare we say, loneliness section. Even though we're going to meet people, she's going to exhibit extreme loneliness in those interactions and perhaps beg for people to stay and make some mistakes.
I called the internal monologue Circe's inner saboteur, and it takes in the form of Pasiphae.
That's true. That's like when your therapist is like, what do you name your inner voice? Like your inner demons.
Exactly.
And hers are named after her evil little sister.
My goal is for other people to have this experience with my voice.
My inner evil voice literally is you, Carter. I don't know why you think that's your goal, as though you don't speak in my head all the time. Like, is it? That's what I hear in my brain.
I don't assign a morality to the voice, but Carter's voice is in my head all the time.
Oh.
Like I have a little homunculus of like Carter in my head of like, what would Carter... But I have a psychic version of you in my mind that's just like, this is what Carter would say.
I actually bet a lot of our podcast listeners do. I'm going to make that the poll. Do you have a Carter in your head going, really? Or, I don't know about that.
I don't know. This comes dangerously close to endorsing something. I'm just going to put this out as a non-endorsement. I'm just mentioning a study in the scientific literature. There is a now very highly cited late 2024 computer science article that this is a Cheryl Darrow. We're bringing a computer science article to the podcast by James Doe et al. And it is basically like, it has many findings. It's trying to basically find a user optimized way to use large language models, which is not something I am saying that you should do. Let's get that out of the way. I'm not trying to say do this. However, the interesting finding about this is that they greatly increase the performance of large language models by having the large language model pretend that it's multiple people and that one of the people is a critic. This is a documented scientific fact that if you can create an inner critic, you can vastly improve your performance and your accuracy in life.
Wow, what a pro-hater article, pro-hater study.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Haters have an irrefutable, provable, empirical role in knowledge generation and truth finding. And so you cultivate that in yourself too. Hear that other voice saying, is it? I don't know. That's useful. That's useful. Validate.
And that's what Circe's doing here. Her voice is Pasiphae.
Yeah.
That's really sad. I mean, it's great to have an inner hater, and it does help her be more accurate in life, but it's also sad because she's thinking about how all of a sudden she's reframing her relationship with her sister. Like, what would it have been like if we could have done magic together growing up, if we had been friends? And like, no, she has to just kind of scrub that from her mind and say, that was never going to happen. My sister is evil. It was always easier to live when she was hateful and imagine like the worst version of her in her head to stay accurate.
Yeah, she's right in the sense that they were never going to have this close relationship. That part's true. However, I do think that a lot of the framing of this section of the book is sort of like we're wrapping Pasiphae out with a bow and we're saying thank you, moving on to the next thing. We're not keeping her as the inner saboteur, inner critic voice for that much longer. I think that part is a mistake. Just because you were never going to be good Judies together, that doesn't mean that she doesn't have a valuable perspective for you. And I do think that she doesn't totally lose that edge, as we're going to see when some other tough, female relative conversations come up in this section. I think there are like echoes of this, even though we're not going to be hearing directly from Pasiphae. We're not going to be invoking her by name that much after this. There's a lot of different writing here about the nature of witchcraft and female lineages. She speculates here about like their mother being the source of magic, which is interesting. It's not Helios, who is, for all external viewers, the reason why she and her siblings are relevant and have power and all of those things.
But with the motherhood and witchcraft thing, I think a lot of the narrative here is like, especially with our experience of Pasiphae in the last couple of chapters, is that like people only respond to power. And women have power over the men in their lives. And some of it's witchcraft, but a lot of it is like desire and control of men's desires. Like Pasiphae, like basically made Minos a cuckold. She like cursed his like sperm to be like scorpions and like snakes. Like she completely controlled the sex. And like that was a huge part of like where she gets power from. And also like this insinuation that mother was also, perhaps seducing Helios with like supernatural abilities as well.
Yes. And it's a great way to segue into Medea, to have this imagined conversation with Pasiphae in her head, which is just her talking to herself. Pasiphae telling her, like, where do you think your witchcraft came from? On page 156, it was in defiance of our father, in defiance of all those who slighted you and would keep you from your desires. And defiance, I think it's a word that's used a lot to describe Medea. And I feel like she's defiant. And like you said, it's her desires and her ability to control the desires of men and blah, blah, blah. And so we're going to prime ourselves and get ready for that like very zeitgeisty, defiant, desirous, evil woman that we know.
My last note here was I think Ariadne in a way served as a foil to Circe, because Ariadne had an actual monster for a sibling. And Ariadne was like, trying to play nice with Asterion and like, still met with Asterion in the cages throughout the whole labyrinth era.
The Minotaur.
Yeah, the Minotaur. Asterion. But
call him by his name,
the
Carter.
humanizing version. Yeah. We're not going to dead name him. And then, I feel like that was like a good foil because it's like outwardly monstrous, but perhaps there was some humanity in the inside versus Circe's beautiful siblings who are all monsters in their own way.
But it's also the fact that Ariadne is so loving and trusting and has this like positive perspective on things that maybe leads her to her tragic fate, getting abandoned.
Yeah. That's the other plot thing that happens in the section is Circe is basically slowly ending her situationship with Hermes. And part of that is this conversation about Ariadne where the telling of it is really distasteful. Hermes is very flippant. Artemis is catching a lot of strays here. Like we're learning a lot about the ways that the combination of these different thoughtless, godly desires are manifesting in an individual person's life who we've met and think is a totally likable, reasonable person just gets killed.
There is such a well-constructed separation between the way that Titans are characterized and the way the Olympians are characterized. The more we start to hear about them, that like the Olympians feel to me markedly younger than the Titans, than the people we grew up with underground in Helios's palace and all of those people who hang around Oceanus and all of them, they feel like the older, like old money, ruling class, oligarchical, we're still around figureheads. But the Olympians are these like bratty, new celebrities, like drama. It's giving the capital frivolous, like what they care about is ridiculous. And they feel so much younger, which is.
They're meddlesome. They are restless. They're trying to play with the toys, whereas the Titans are just, they're tired. They don't have to do all that.
Which is not a perspective we get to enjoy a lot within the Riordan verse because we're a generation below, but getting to look at them through Circe's perspective as she's like from the Titan line, it does seem like they're just so young and so stupid. And what they value is so ridiculous.
Yeah, because Artemis murders Ariadne and it's like, it's random, right? Like I have the sense that for the Titans, vengeance is not done with any sense of perspective and consequence, but it is like motivated. Whereas for the Olympians, I mean, we get no motivation here. And I Googled it and I couldn't find like in other tellings of this, like any clear motivation. I actually saw, not to cite Reddit, but there was this one like Greek person on Reddit being like, in school in Greece, it was just kind of like, we learned that, don't quote me on this, like for the man side, when there's random deaths of like male heroes or whatever, it's attributed to some god, like maybe it's Apollo. And then when there's random female deaths, it's like attributed to Artemis. And I don't know what's going on with that.
There are different ideas about that. I think in antiquity that Artemis is protecting maidenhood by killing young women before bad things can happen to them or before they can become corrupted or whatever. Like
in this case, by Dionysus.
Ill-defined motivation. Yeah. That's, I think, part of it. I do also feel like it's worth noting here, to your point, that there are different versions of this story. And I think that the most popular version of the story of Ariadne today does not involve her dying by Artemis's hand. The most popular version involves her getting married to Dionysus and going to Olympus. That is the version that's in the Riordan verse. It's the version that's in Delaire's. I think it's probably, listener, the version that you've heard before this. Correct us if we're wrong. It is an interesting adaptive choice, I think, to lean into this. And I think this is as good a time as any to introduce my overarching question for this section, which is, how, like, okay, no, death of the author. Let me think about how I want to phrase this. Does it not seem to you like Circe's narrative here makes it really... There is a separation that is created between her and other women that seems quite harsh. Like, it is a strong line that divides her from most of the other complex female characters that are at play that I think other people would assume her to have more sympathies with or would generally be written in a way that's more sympathetic to readers. Like I think Artemis in a lot of modern ideas of Greek mythology is a sympathetic figure. And we're kind of going out of our way here to whack her and to have Circe have this antagonistic mental relationship with her. We're about to talk about Medea, and that's going to be a huge undercurrent there. Maybe we'll talk about it more for Medea. I just want to flag that.
I feel like the project of this book is so... This book gives us so much space to imagine womanhood at this time and in this world that we don't have to like every woman we meet. And all of these specific women are their own people. And if that means that they suck or they're like not and like sympathetic, then that's fine. You know, that we don't have to like them in order for them to be like valid and to make the choices that they're making.
I think not being sympathetic is valid in one thing. The specific space that I'm curious about, though, is the cleansing of Circe's reputation and simultaneous dirtying of most of these other female characters' reputations.
Because the book does want us to like Circe.
Her like fatal flaw is like almost that she's too moral, that she's like too good and too trusting and too like believing of good in the world, of the power structures, of people reciprocating and like being respectful in these interactions. I feel like she takes the moral high ground in almost every interaction. We'll see this later too with like Medea, but she's always like, this is what you should be doing.
Yeah, in every conflict Circe has, it's very easy to take her side.
And I think part of it is because like, you know, this is told from her perspective, and this is a unreliable narrator of sorts. You know, things could be skewed.
It doesn't bother me that I would take her side in most conflicts, but I also don't think it's like every single woman she comes out on top, because I think when we get to Penelope, that flips it on its head.
That's, I think, the only counterexample in the book, and of course a notable one, because that is kind of where we're headed.
I also don't think that in this circumstance with Medea, it's like Circe is right and Medea is wrong. I think it's just that Medea is young and Circe already went through this in her own life. I don't see her as like winning some kind of argument against her niece. I just see it as being like, oh, I wish I could save you from this, but I obviously can't.
Yeah, I am interested. We'll get to it later, but I am interested in the way that like Medea is way less assimilable than Circe because of the degree of evil that her actions represent. And yeah, for Circe, I think it's easier to narrate motivation and understanding than it is for Medea.
Yeah. Should we take a quick break and then get into Medea's arrival? Let's do it. So as Circe is breaking off her situationship with her second boyfriend, Hermes, I feel like she's just kind of using him at the end here to get information about Pasiphae. And she keeps saying that she's like searching for something, and like all of these stories about her sister, she's trying to like grab a hold of something and she doesn't know what it is. And then eventually I think it's just the excuse and the like satisfactory reason to live in her own isolationism, to be like, wow, all this evil stuff Pasiphae did, especially to these girls that did no wrong. She says, if I was trapped on this island, at least I did not have to share the world with her and all her kind. Pacing by my lion, I said, it is done. I will think of them no more. I cast them out and I am finished.
Yeah. She's protecting her peace.
She's trying to protect her peace.
Maybe a little too much. And she also does formally break up with Hermes in a way that I was, okay, I have to say this. I was like, it was... One of the main critiques that she levels against Hermes, obviously she's mad that he's an Olympian, he doesn't care enough about the mortals. That's very valid. That's not where she is in her journey. She does also say, quote, when his hands reached for me, I felt a strange dislocation. They were perfect and unscarred. I think that this is something that we could read several ways. One of the most obvious reading that they want you to have is he is perfect in a way that is not human. Circe is looking for surprise and imperfection and grit, and that's not what he's bringing. However, I'm going to say it, I thought this was a little femphobic. I was surprised that Circe, who previously was all about collecting her little bisexual men, is now like, oh, no. Too smooth. He's not giving manual labor aesthetic to the dumps with him. That's not doing it for me anymore. I was a little shocked. That's all I'm going to say about that.
The way I read it was a direct contrast to Daedalus, who did have scars on his hand. And it seemed like she liked Daedalus more.
And then Odysseus. We're going to get really a type for Circe.
These things are not in conflict. I think what I'm saying is completely aligned with everything that has been said subsequently.
You don't think she likes fed boys?
No, I think that's part of her journey. She's trying to leave that behind. And I'm like, Circe, you know,
I don't think I'm just confused because I don't think she's ever liked femboys. She was all up into Glaucus because he was like dirty, looked really, really old, even though he wasn't, covered in salt.
Getting into Hermes the first time, that is completely incongruous with this narrative. Like the only reason that you start getting with Hermes is because
he's bisexual.
You're trying to get up in the Timothée Chalamet of it all. I just think that the hand imagery is an interesting way to sort of capture and concentrate that broader progression into a specific physical manifestation and image.
Now that you mentioned hands, this is kind of skipping forward a little bit, but like when she turns the men into pigs, she's like, they no longer have their hands. And that is the way men make sense of the world and how they interact with the world. So I think the emphasis of hands and like ability to do things, it's potential.
I love that, Sam.
Right?
Like,
we're converging on the same thing.
No.
The focus on the hands is her trying to talk about Hermes' masculinity. I'm just going to say she started off as a Fujo. And she's moving away from that. And like, it's her right. It's fine.
I just really liked what Sam just said about the hands and how like the idea of the scars on his hand is not only his own hard work, but also how he greets the world. That like he has endured suffering and that Hermes never has and never will.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, obviously that is the primary reading of the situation and one that is important and that you should bring to that passage.
This calls for the conspiracy theory pointing at the board meme, please. Thank you, Robert. Okay, moving on.
Medea?
It's Medea time. This is really where, Jack, I think we're gonna flip it to you.
Comparative literature. Let's go. Let's compare this literature.
Wait, we need to have a quick explanatory comma here. Jack has a degree in comparative literature, and at one time, can you tell the story about how you got picked out of a crowd as a comparative literature major?
By TV writer Mike Schur.
TV legend Michael Schur of The Office, The Good Place, Parks and Recreation, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, The Man on the Inside. I could keep going.
Yeah, so post-college, he was like, for work, he came for a speaker event, and then we were at a dinner after, and I was like, you know how these dinners go, where it's like a long table, and I am not at his part of the table. There's a different conversation. But somewhere in the middle of his conversation that I am not privy to, he just like turns over to my corner and is like, oh, Jack, like, You did complet, right?
And important context here is that Jack had not previously said anything to famous television writer Michael Schur about what you had studied in undergrad, right? Like maybe like talking about books or something, but like you had not said, I studied complet.
Yeah, I mean, I think we knew that it was somewhere in the humanities, but
very specific read.
And I'm not even a person that's good at languages. I'm not good at like the point of like doing complet versus English.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's like different, you came into complet as like a theory person, right? Like,
Sure.
Anyway, Jack, complet major, as famously read by legendary television writer Michael Schur, has a word for us about Medea.
Yeah, I'm gonna give like a rundown of just some of the prominent Medeas, so we understand like how we arrive at this telling. Medea, the most like quote unquote canonical version, and like honestly like a really good version, is Euripides, who is Greek. We're in 431 BC. Euripides apparently is a person who made it like an essential part of the story that Medea commits infanticide, and also that like Jason has this like marital betrayal. Like apparently in other tellings, like sometimes the children's death was attributed to other things or it wasn't clear, but Euripides like really cements the Medea that like we know and struggle with. Medea also in Euripides, like this is not the story of the Golden Fleece. This picks up once they are in Corinth. Yeah, and Euripides' telling is like it's like not a very descriptive way to say it, but it's very complex. Like it really is. Like there's a lot of sympathy. Like there's a chorus of women who reacts and like relates to Medea. And as the chorus does in Greek mythology, like narrates what is going on, and they're very aligned with Medea initially. But then there's also this horror at like what happens and what Medea does, which is both justified and also like doesn't completely make sense. Medea gets her revenge in Euripides' telling and later in like many ways. Like she murders the king, she murders the new wife, and then she has to go and murder the kids too. And it's like, well, why did we need that? Like we sort of get it, but we also really don't. And there's a couple of things from Euripides that I want to call out in terms of historical context that are really interesting. So Euripides is writing right after the Peloponnesian War. This is Athens versus Sparta. But part of what secured Sparta's victory in the Peloponnesian War is the Persian invasion. The Persians, both financially and then militarily, helped the Spartans. So this is relevant because in Euripides' version and many after, Medea is called a barbarian. Colchian, that's not an ethnicity, so I'm not trying to say like that like barbarian is 100% mappable onto contemporary ideas of ethnicity. However, it was true that Medea is this foreigner. She is this absolute outsider, and Colchis is not Greece. And I don't think that we get that in Circe. Like, we don't understand, because Hades is the direct brother of Circe and rules over Colchis. So like we kind of see this as all in the same universe, but in Greece, like, Colchis is totally not a part of Greece and is understood as like a barbarian land. So like Jason to Medea and Euripides says, instead of living among barbarians, you now inhabit a Greek land and understand our ways, how to live by law instead of the sweet will of force. That's a quote from the translation. Medea in this translation is also called a refugee. So there's some really significant ways that her foreignness is very historically consequential and politically consequential. The other aspect of this is that soon before Euripides' time of writing, the Athenian government passed laws that forbade Athenian men to take foreign wives in order, to obviously reduce the amount of miscegenation and mixed children, which were called in the ancient Greek term mixobarbaroi. So using barbarian in the term for that. Yeah. So I think that I noticed in Circe just the lack of this kind of consideration of what it means to be, in a more general sense, like a foreigner versus a barbarian. Circe does say that Medea is like going to be a foreigner when she arrives to Jason's homeland, and like is not going to get the welcome that she deserves. But why? Like in Circe, it seems kind of like, oh, it's just because, this isn't your royal line, so they won't trust you and you're a witch. But in Euripides, it's because Medea is unlawful, and the unlawful barbarian, like Eastern codedness that she has is related to her witchcraft. And the other thing about Euripides that remains in some of the other tellings is that Medea is really like connected to her divinity. And this is a little bit there in Circe, but Euripides' Medea was a bit scandalous because Medea escapes unpunished, and she escapes in this dragon-drawn chariot. Diva, right? Diva.
It is one of the iconic images of mythology, is her, specifically,
fire dragon.
If you're a Del Layers kid, you will remember that the story, the section ends with this black and white, like, charcoal-looking drawing of the bottom of Medea's dragon-pulled chariot ascending into these very textured clouds, where like only the bottom half of her body is showing. It is an amazing image.
And at least in this version, that's her father's chariot. So it's her stealing her dad's car, too.
Yeah. In Euripides, it's sent by Helios, which is also interesting in comparison to Circe, because whenever Circe thinks that Helios is going to intervene because she's been wronged in some way, he doesn't. But he does for Medea. So there's this like real stark difference here, and the sense of Medea's divinity, even though she's technically the moral one, but like her divinity is more realized in some sense. Yeah, and then like I don't really know what to say about the other adaptation. Like in the Roman period, there's Seneca and Ovid, and like some people say that becomes like a little more moralistic at that point. I don't know. I don't really know enough about those versions. And then the Roman versions become taken up in like medieval England, when Medea becomes, like, as in Chaucer and other authors at that time, more of like a direct symbol of female monstrosity. And then by kind of the mid-late 18th century, we start to get more of Medea as an explicitly wronged woman, and this more like feminist concern coming up. And there's a lot of contemporary stuff that's been done with Medea too. And I think that the one that is both like one of the more prominent ones, and I think the best comparison to Circe, as in Circe the book by Madeline Miller, is Krista Wolf's Medea. Like, if you're going to go into a bookshop, if they made a table of contemporary retellings, especially like feminist retellings of Greek mythology, you would have Krista Wolf and you would have Madeline Miller. Like, they are like some of our top people for this. The connection I want to draw here is that in both Madeline Miller's Circe, to talk about Circe, not Medea, like Circe in Circe, and Krista Wolf's Medea, both of these are projects of making innocent this otherwise vilified female figure from Greek mythology. But in some ways, I think that they're quite different, because Krista Wolf's adaptation is really political. Like, it's a tale of political corruption more so than anything else. For historical context, like, Krista Wolf is East German and a socialist and lived through the fall of the Berlin Wall. So, that is present in her work. Whereas I think in Circe, rather than kind of like a more explicit political grounding, the idea of innocence is more about
girlhood,
morality and this like difference between the divine and the human, and needing to be closer to the human to have a sense
of morality.
Of morality.
Absolutely. I want to interject real quick with a quote that's literally from the beginning of the section that I think both Carter and I wrote down, that rage and grief, thwarted desire, lust, and self-pity are emotions that God knows well, but guilt and shame, remorse, ambivalence, those are foreign countries to our kind, which must be learned stone by stone. So saying inherently that humanity has morals and the gods do not.
Exactly. Yeah. So obviously retellings of Medea have been able to do like a similarly recuperative project to Miller's Circe, but Medea's harder to assimilate, like, because, as I said earlier, like, this is not a Greek term because it's a Christian term, but Medea, like, sins. You know, like, she does, like, the worst
her
sin
miasma
possible.
is really thick. How do you cleanse her of her miasma, which is what she's coming to Circe for? How do you give her the catharsis for something that is so uncleansable?
Totally. I mean, that was one of my favorite parts of this section. Like, as a term of, like, narration and writing, Miller really slays with the way that, like, Jason, Medea, and the Argonauts arrive, like, palpably cloaked in sin or this miasma. Like, that was awesome.
Cloaked in sin, head down, identity concealed,
black veil.
But, like, immediately the narrative is telling you these are the Argonauts. Like, she opens this section by saying, like, this is the legendary boat. Everyone wishes they were here, but also, who is she? Who is she? I don't care about anybody else.
Yeah, it was a very, like, cinematic moment.
Well, we're talking about adaptations. I did a musical adaptation of Medea called Rock Medea back in 2023 at Joe's Pub, written by Dan Cantor and Gian Perez, starring Lama Ahomasi as Medea. And it was a more politically minded idea of Medea as a refugee. I was in the chorus, women reacting to and, like, supporting and fearing all of these choices that she was making. And I feel like so much so in a lot of our, at least, like, the modern perspective we take on these versions of Medea is that she's, like, this older woman because she's a mother, that, like, she isn't like a little girl, because of course, like, we can't possibly imagine, like, a girl sitting it. She has to be like an older woman, like a mother, closer to a crone. But I really like how young Medea is in this book, that she really feels like a girl.
Would we all consider Saint Omer, the 2022 film, a Medea retelling, in the sense that, like, are we at a point now in our Medea retellings where, like, the stylized facts of a Medea retelling are, like, it is a woman who is somehow racially or nationally othered who commits infanticide?
I think
so. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one thing that, when we were talking about how this narrative treats Circe in a very, like, positive light, I remember reading Euripides' Medea, and I was rooting for Medea. I was like, yeah, you go get him. Jason deserves everything. Kill the
he is the real villain. Yeah.
Yeah, he's the real villain. And it kind of shows, like, how, depending on which narrative you read, like, your sympathies go towards different characters, right?
Yeah.
And then also I wanted to comment about what you said about barbarianism. So I minored in comparative literature, so not quite
Sam.
as good. Not
qualified.
Not quite. But I'm partially qualified only to explain the etymology of the word barbarian. So barbarian comes from barbar, which is basically onomatopoeia of, like, the ancient Greek and Romans making fun of people whose language they didn't understand. So, like, they're like, oh, everything coming out of my mouth is ba 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 ba, barbar. So barbarian just refers to someone with, like, a foreign tongue, so to speak. And then another thing that really stuck out to me when I was reading Euripides' version was, like, they kept describing Medea as Asian, and I was like, I'm Asian. Who is this Asian queen? But I realized it's a different part of Asia.
Representation matters.
Yeah. Okay. This has been a very good Medea background. We've discussed her arriving on the boat, identity concealed, not named as Medea yet. They're asking for this cleansing rite, which is not magical. It is just, like, they literally use the word catharsis. They spell with the K because it's Greek. But, like, it's the same thing. It's the idea of we're trying to rid you of this psychic, emotional, maybe metaphysical, because it is represented in this miasma, but this burden that you're carrying based on this wrongdoing that you've done.
And if anyone is unfamiliar with the idea of miasma, because I did kind of need to look it up to clarify, this Madeline Miller, being the person with a bajillion degrees in classics that she is, would have been using this in the very specific way of, like, the ancient Greek, like, religious idea of, like, what's basically a curse, like, that you, like, if you do something that is so wrong and so evil, you become tainted, and those around you become tainted until you can perform this rite of catharsis and of cleansing.
It's frequently described in plays, mostly from ancient Greek times. Okay, we do get the interesting choice here that Circe, in her narration, is saying that she doesn't know, A, who this is and what they did when she is agreeing to perform the rite. She is cleansing them, she is absolving them without this understanding. This to me was the choice where I was like, okay, we're doing a separating task here. Like, part of the way that we're trying to understand Circe, and part of the way that her character is given to us, is through this hard line that we're getting between her and Medea. The Medea, as the, like, infanticide person, like, we're not trying to get all up in that. She and Circe are not going to be going the same direction here.
They're not kikiing.
We're not trying, like, Madeline Miller is not interested in the project of also trying to redeem Medea.
Right.
And
Because
like
it
trying to
hasn't happened
recontextualize her. It hasn't happened yet. That's one important thing. But also, like, I don't know. I just think that, like, in this moment, like, Circe, in a lot of the retellings that I'm familiar with, Circe fully knows who it is and like why she's doing this. Like, she sees a niece in need who is a little lost and could benefit from her help and might go in the quote unquote right direction or whatever, like with her help. Like, maybe Circe's not a super moralistic figure, but there's some sort of sense that like Circe is doing something that is vaguely compassionate and that there's some sort of understanding that goes with that.
Mm-hmm.
And Madeline Miller is very clearly here saying that that's not what's going on. Circe is not doing a favor for a niece. She's doing this sight unseen because she has a broader, like, almost, like, this felt like Christian to me. This idea that, like, you need, like, almost like
Jesus.
a Catholicism.
She's Jesus.
It's a Jesus thing. Like, I'm forgiving you regardless of what you did and regardless of what you're going to do tomorrow, because fundamentally forgiveness is a good thing, rather than, like, we're aligned in this politically, emotionally, morally, whatever. I thought that was really weird.
Yeah, so you do think that this is like a choice? Because I was looking this up earlier trying to figure out if it's true that in the ancient ritual of catharsis, or catharmos as it's sometimes called, that like the person who's doing the cleansing can't question the supplicant. I couldn't find anything like to suggest that is the case. I found like some suggestions that maybe suggest that that's actually not the case.
I could text Emily Garber right now.
Yeah, we can phone a classicist, but I will also submit that, like, regardless of whether or not you can ask them follow-up questions, I think that in a lot of other versions of the myth, like, at a minimum, she has some understanding. Like, whether or not she's questioning her, like, she has an idea of what it is that happened when she's doing this. And here it is very clear that she knows literally nothing other than that something bad happened and that this strange girl has an interesting, powerful aura about her that we're going to be trying to investigate in some way because we're curious about it.
One thing I also liked about the depiction of Medea and Jason throughout this whole saga was that Jason kind of was like an idiot the whole time. And Medea was always the steady one. Like, she was a little bit crazy, but she was like confident, self-assured, like knew what she wanted. She walked steady, head held high, even though she like just killed a bunch of people. Like, I respected that. I was like, Jason was the himbo that he is, because that's literally his, among the Greek characters. Like, Theseus was like smart, you know, like Hercules was strong, but Jason was just beautiful.
I mean, I gotta say though, as a himbo defender, it's like, it's not even that Jason's a himbo, it's that he's giving nothing. He's literally drugged.
Circe calls him a weak reed, which is the antiquity translation of a wet paper towel.
A wet noodle.
He literally, like, they do the trope of they have the whole conversation while he is unconscious between them at the table. Like, they were bad-mouthing him when he is sitting there not understanding what's going on, which is like the highest, most classical, accessible form of like, this person is nothing. He is a like flimsy thing there for us to parade about, have a relationship with.
To comment on what Sam just said, though, like, I think the tragedy of this and the tragedy of Medea and what Circe is seeing in Medea is that she does not hold her head high. She only holds her head high when Jason is drugged. She is not being her true self in front of him. She is like keeping her head down, like feeding him each little tiny piece of meat, only the best meat for my little man, and acting like
very, very
scary
aggressive
weak mother
of how meek she is.
Yes, trying to be meek, so trying to fulfill this like weird, and maybe it's like trying to fulfill this idea of like whatever a Greek wife is, if we wanted to put that reading onto it, that like
down.
Trying to slot into this circumstance that she is not. And Circe is like, whoa, like, you look trapped. I'm trapped.
Quote, now that I knew who she was, such meekness looked absurd on her, like a great eagle trying to hunch down and fit inside a sparrow's nest. Which I think is right. Like, this whole time, we're seeing this happen, and we're like, huh? This is uncomfortable. I feel grossed out reading this. Not just because this would be wrong for anyone, but because you look silly. This isn't working. It's not just that it's disrespectful to yourself. It's that no one is being fooled, I think, by what's going on. He's not.
No,
being
that's
fooled.
why you had to
like, she's
him.
doing this whole thing, and he isn't even like
he flinches.
He has to constantly lie to himself, but he can tell he's lying to himself about this play act that she's doing because she's not convincing. It's so unnatural to her that she can't even properly belittle herself to achieve a political social position.
Really quick tangent. I think that we need to all, in the future adaptations of Heroes of Olympus, put this kind of a characterization onto Piper so much more as being the woman who is trying to bow her head in order to be in a relationship with Jason. Moving on.
Literally Jason.
mhm.
Yeah. Who again gives nothing. Well, it's his legacy. No one named their kid Jason.
One other thing I wanted to say about the catharsis ritual is that the piglet that she sacrifices like consented to the sacrifice.
It's giving Jesus.
Like it just kind
It's
of
giving,
was like
I'm kind
it
of
was
like a
yeah,
prettier
you-
Jesus.
yeah, it's like it's the lamb, right? It consented to the sacrifice, and I also wrote that she was gonna cook that piglet later. We love a sustainable queen, head to tail butchery right there. I also think that this piglet consenting to the sacrifice is also a very good contrast to what happens to the men at the end of the next episode about like the peaceful pig versus the squealing pig. You know,
That men actually make terrible pigs.
yeah, they do make terrible pigs.
I think the major other like characterization note about Medea is that when we think Medea, word number one might be infanticide. Word number two, I think, is madness. Like she is supposed to be I'm using quotes here. I'm using air quotes as not a visual medium. So I'm just going to say, quote unquote, she is the mad woman. She is a quote unquote crazy woman. And in this book, she is the one who brings this terminology up. Like these are her words, and she's using it as a cloak, knowingly, willingly. Like she is saying, like, this is not true for me, but this is a thing that I can use to achieve what I want, make people think of me in a way that's youthful. I found this really interesting. Jack, I'm wondering if you had thoughts about this as someone who I remember specifically describing like an essay about the interface between Medea and like madness as like a literary theory, something or other.
Oh, I'm not sure if I did that. Usually Carter remembers my past a lot better than I do. And I think that what I can say at this point is that madness is both obviously a pathologizing term, but also, I don't know if this is too contemporary, but also like an exculpatory term. Like the idea of Medea, like, oh, was she driven to her acts because, you know, like she really wanted to, or was she mad? And madness can be a way of both undermining someone and excusing them at the same time. And I don't know if that's what's going on here.
And
but...
Yeah.
I think it absolutely is. I think she's trying to do both things by
Yes.
using it herself, saying, I was mad.
Mhm.
I'm just a girl in love. I can't be held responsible for my actions. I have no underlying issues to address. I'm certifiably cute and adorably obsessed.
That's a Crazy Girlfriend reference for those of you keeping track at home.
Yeah, but the mad woman is like such an important trope throughout Western literature. Like one of the key early feminist texts in literary theory is Mad Woman in the Attic. And I think if you actually delve into the particulars of the argument, like there's a reason that it hasn't like held up so much. And I don't need to go into all of that. But like the premise does really hold up, which is that like, okay, in this book, they're looking at Victorian literature written by women, so that's different. But they're diagnosing, and I'm saying there because it's co-authored by two women, Susan Gubar and Sandra Gilbert. But anyway, so there's two really big tropes of women in literature, and they're either angels, which is a male idealization, or they're monster/mad woman, which is a manifestation of male fear. And in their book, they actually mention Circe as an example of the latter, not Medea, strangely, but Circe, yeah.
Which is, again, a brilliant function of this book as describing her no longer as a demon, but as Jesus herself.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that in that book, as far as I understand it, which I think is similar to what Madeline Miller is doing with Circe, they're kind of showing that madness is in many ways an effect of patriarchy. So even as, you know, it's like kind of reclaiming madness in a way, it's also like through that reclamation saying that madness is actually really anything but, in a certain way. Whereas when I think of madness in some more recent work, which is driven by like the formation of fields like Black studies, queer studies, disability studies, there's more this idea that we less need to find reasons for madness than to use madness like on its own terms as a resource for itself. Like there's a recent book that's gotten a fair amount of attention called How to Go Mad Without Losing Your Mind, which is looking at Black aesthetics tradition specifically. Yeah, so like we've brought up in the contrast between Medea and Circe, there's a bit too much of a line between the two that I'm comfortable with, where in which Medea is mad and Circe, who would otherwise be one of these mad witches in ancient Greek, is fully understandable.
That's so interesting because I do see like how that could be read onto this, but that's not how I read it. I read it as like Medea is fully aware and responsible for her actions, using madness as that exculpatory excuse, and that Circe sees right through it and says, you don't have to do any of that if you just stay here with me outside of society. That like all of those things only matter if you are being demonized by the Greeks. If you are going to that place where they are going to hurt you, you could stay here with me because I'm so lonely and I need you here.
Yeah, no, I do.
Erica is saying Saoirse Ronan in Little Women 2019. I'm saying The Witch in Into the Woods.
The world is dark and wild.
This also kind of recalls the mention of Dionysus in the past chapter, because the other famous madness is also Euripides' Bacchae, which is madness induced by Dionysus and like alcohol and intoxication and the enthusiasm of letting the god within, And I feel like in both of them, madness in a way is a way for women to transgress the limitations placed upon them. Like women can become powerful through madness and like, exact vengeance and violence in a way that they would not be without madness.
In this particular book, it functions along the same lines as monstrosity. It's like we're like viewing them very much as parallel constructs in the way that people have described them. Like the line that Hades gives about monstrosity is exactly what you're saying, and exactly how Medea is kind of talking about proposing to live her life. Like she's like, I'm going to go back into society, and because I have this thing, I'm going to be the monster, and that's going to work out for me.
Which is how her brother chose to live.
Exactly.
Which is how Circe's brother, aka her father, chose to live, and that's why she's mimicking that.
Yes, it's why she's mimicking, and this is why, like, to me, this is like where the Into the Woods analogy comes in, because Circe's like whole reaction to this is like, you are too young, you don't understand, and there is another way to live where you just like fully, like, you can fully withdraw. You could just not do any of this. Who out there
can love you more than I?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that, like,
who out there can give you what I cannot supply. Yeah.
Yes. The actual line here, I think, is really, this is to me like one of the great lines of this book. Medea says, "What of Jason?" And Circe says, "Let him be a hero. You are something else." And what is that? A witch with unbound power who need answer to none but herself. It goes downhill from there. Medea is not actually, this is not what she sees for herself particularly. She turns around and reads Circe for filth and is like, "You're lonely, you have nothing. I'm not going to be an old spinster like you. No, thank you."
Because Circe is Jesus, she like cannot get upset at this because Medea is just doing exactly what Circe did to her grandmother.
Yeah.
Where's the freaking line? I delivered him the fleece. He loves me. She stood fixed in her outrage, bright and defiant. Just so must I have seemed to my grandmother when she said to me, those are two different things.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's also, I mean, the other issue of it is that Medea is immortal and Circe is not.
Yes, and Medea specifically mentions this. Like this is kind of her closing argument at the end of the two of them reading the filth out of each other. Like this argument is really interesting because like they take turns being regressive and they take turns being like vaguely, like, I don't want to say abolitionist, but like, you know, like societally deconstructionist in their arguments. And it kind of ends with Medea sort of like stepping outside of that binary and basically just saying like, I only have so many years. And given that I only have so many years, I have to do my thing. Like I have to like go into society, interact with people, form these relationships, even if you think that they might not work out.
Which sucks for Circe, who in the next section is going to experience her pet cat dying. She's always going to be lonely. She's always going to be separated from the things that she loves because they are going to die and they have the problem of finite time and she does not.
Mm-hmm.
I also just made a connection about madness and the fact that at the end of Medea and Euripides, she like doesn't get punished for anything. This was the original insanity defense.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we don't have a ton of time left. There's a little bit more that goes on once Medea leaves, but is there anything else we want to say about? I mean, we could talk about this for 4 hours.
Medea is the queen. Such an interesting character because of like, it's this binary between someone who is like, what was the term you used, Jack? Like not reconcilable, but like redeemable. Sympathetic. Understandable. Someone whose rationality you can work your way into.
But is irredeemable.
Like Medea is irredeemable. Like there's a certain kind of like moral cavern that we can't follow her across when she kills her kids.
Yeah, and that's why, like, to foreshadow a bit, it's interesting that Miller put such emphasis on how Circe is as a mother, and a mother that we recognize in a very human way later as being like unconditionally loving. I would do anything for my child. And then like as an understanding of like the stakes of life and mortality. I know that that's coming from a different part of the book, and that Medea's infanticide isn't even narrated in Circe, but obviously it's something that most readers arrive with. When I'm, kind of like wishing that they had been portrayed a bit closer to each other, as Circe's like reaching out and offering, but in the narration itself is a bit closer to each other rather as representing different things. What I think specifically really gets me is how they're represented as like opposite kinds of mothers.
Yeah, I think there's a lot in that. Yeah.
I also want to say it feels to me like Medea, more than any other character we meet in this book, is so realized by the prose, so well realized and so well characterized and so in the middle of her story that it feels like there's a lot that Madeline Miller has to say that she has not said yet. And I don't know that this is ever something she would consider, but it feels like more than any other character in this book that is the woman who like has a Madeline Miller book left.
Yeah.
But somebody already did it. But she could.
Mean, a lot of people.
There's no law.
I mean, everyone's done everything at this point. Is Greek
Everyone's
mythology.
done everything. These are retellings. We know that the next thing she's working on is Persephone, but it feels like this is just like we're tapping on the top of a well with this character and with everything that there is with her, and that there's so much more to be said and explored.
Anyway, there's a few more things that happen in this section. We get the nymph visitors who start to come. When we meet Circe and Percy Jackson, she famously has this whole spa staffed by tons of women. We get the first nymph visitor, and we start to have more of them come. I feel like this is another section where, like, I don't know, like, it's very different in nature because here, like, we're seeing, what I think we're getting with Circe is that up at, like, from almost all the book, she has either a moral or an aesthetic firm barrier between her and all the other women. We've mostly seen the moral barrier up until this point, and with all the nymphs, we have this, I think, basically an aesthetic barrier. She finds all of these nymphs cringe and gross and vapid, and she's so upset to be sharing her island with all of them. And she basically sees this as a way that she's being put upon by men. Like, their fathers are sending them without her consent, and her personal space is being violated by these men, even though it is their daughters who are coming to the island.
She's like, I'm supposed to be exiled. Why are all these people here?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that it happens right before she is literally violated.
Yes.
That, like, this is the precursor to that. And also that it's like, I don't know how the retellings usually take it, but the fact that it's her alone on this island full of girls, and that's when the men come.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like they could smell it.
Yeah.
It's interesting, too, that, like, I think this is the only section that really considers Circe as a nymph, right? Like, she is part nymph, she's the daughter of a nymph, and overall the project of this book is to consider the difference of the relationship between Circe as divine and Circe as having these like human elements to her, like her voice. But what does it mean that she's a nymph? And nymph are the ones who are violated, and this is what this section is partly about.
You're right that it reminds us of her nature as a nymph, and that even though we are hearing her side of the story, that the rest of the world sees her as just one of these girls.
And Hermes is playing into this. Our last conversation with Hermes before we forever end the situationship is when he comes back and she's complaining to him, trying to get the nymphs away. He basically...
He said, nymphs
We've already done the content warning.
Screaming, but I'll tell you a secret. They are terrible at getting away.
He suggests... Well, he initially says, you should hook up with some of the nymphs. Olo has already guessed on our podcast at that point. On that point, we co-sign. Circe, how about you try some other relationships with people who are not gross? How about that? However, Hermes immediately follows this up by suggesting that she force herself upon them.
Do it non-consensually.
And this is highlighting this like dual role of Circe in her life. Like in this conversation, we experience this flip of her saying like, I am a nymph. I'm also a god. I am in both of these positions. Like I like have related to the person being taken advantage of, and I've related to a person with power who can take advantage of others. It's very tough to read foregrounding for the assault description that comes immediately afterwards.
Yeah, I had to stop reading during this chapter and then like come back to it like 3 hours later because I just was like, I read it once already and I was like, I can't go through this again, but then I had to, so I could. Yeah,
it's quite bad. I honestly forgot about it. Like, I think that my brain kind of scrubbed it out of my experience of reading this book, and I feel bad that it's something that you have to kind of read.
Yeah,
I mean, in the sense that it's very well written, it's very graphic.
Yeah,
but it is a part of her story.
And this is the first time she turns men into pigs. It is as an immediate self-defense mechanism when she's in the process of experiencing an assault. Yeah, and I think that is relevant context for the journey that she takes with men with this transformation, with her witchcraft, to know that it begins from this point of very like emergent defense. That's like everything that happens in these sections. Do people have any final meditations to offer, questions that you're still thinking about?
I have a question to ask because I really have to go. My question is that we've been talking about this book as the Bible, and I think we especially circle this idea of like Circe as being this like moral high ground that makes her akin to a kind of Jesus figure, especially in the way that she cleanses Medea and Jason. So if this book is the Bible and this section is one parable within that Bible, what is the lesson we get out of this section in our learning how to be a human woman?
Learning how to be a human woman.
So there's this concept of melancholic incorporation, where if you cannot properly mourn someone like Pasiphae, you like internalize like a psychic version of them into yourself. And I think this idea of like people only respect power and that is the only thing that you have in this world. I think this is kind of the turning point for Circe, in which she fully leans into the power that she has as like a sorceress and is like, I'm done playing nice. And then like in the next couple of chapters, she's having fun toying with these men after this process. Like she leans into what can be conceived as like villainy. The villainy that like we sometimes associate with Circe outside of this book, right? Of like, oh, like this is the mad woman, the witch, right? And it's really sad because it's like, it's kind of it's the loss of her innocence in a lot of ways. And she comes out of this like a harder, more vicious woman.
Mm-hmm. Like, I think we do see that's really helpful. Like, we do see an influence that Medea has, where when Circe tells Medea the quote that you guys had earlier, you know, you're a witch with unbound power who need answer to none but herself. I kind of feel like we haven't seen Circe realize that in herself until this moment.
Yeah. I think that's the parable is be an auntie. And internalize that. When she uses the direct address of niece, I did a little bit like levitate, ascend. I think that is the truest ultimate form for us all to become
auntie.
Yeah, offering wisdom from a place of like diagonal wisdom.
Diagonal wisdom. The diagonal wisdom of auntie-hood. That's the episode title.
And it's like how much she unlocks for herself when she's like, I am auntie now. Like, let me tell you about this time my sister read me for filth. And now I'm going to actually internalize that lesson for the first time because I'm telling you about this.
Yeah.
And I think the last line was pretty great. It was like, as it turned out, I did kill pigs that night after all. And I was like, yeah.
Kill him.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we all become aunties one day. Sam, you're an auntie. Jealous.
Because I'm old?
You literally are.
Is that what you meant by auntie?
You have any? I'm guessing neither of you want to promote anything or tell people where they can find you.
I'm good. Oh, you should subscribe to their Patreon.
Yay!
Yes.
Patreon.com/seaweedbrain. Sam and Jack, thank you for joining us today. We love you both, and you're both highly qualified to be here.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for letting us talk about Medea, who is so fun.
There can never be too many retellings. Give me another book. Next week, we've got chapters 15 through 17, Odysseus, with our very special friend, Kyle Prue, returning to us. So join us next week. Thank you all for participating in Hot Circe Summer. We'll see you then.
Bye.